I do get a little bit choked up because, my God, the people that I come from are so impressive. They're just,
Mm,
they're just impressive people. It's kind of like a forest for the trees type of situation when you're surrounded and you don't really understand like the magnificence of the trees. You don't understand all of the gifts that they're providing. You don't understand the impact when they get cut down.
mm,
You just kind of keep moving through the trees without much regard for all that they are and everything that happens beneath the surface
mm.
and the things that they need to do to sustain themselves. And so, yeah, I just don't think I fully appreciated it. And now, as we're talking, and I'm thinking about these new posts that just recently came up in the news about Black History Month being taken off of the Google Calendar, and I was already thinking about the family. I was already thinking about the legacy. I was already thinking about that. And this is kind of like annually, not necessarily in February, but annually I go through this box and I think
Mm.
about and remind myself of these incredible people who made me.
Is
And
this a metaphysical box? Is this a box of
it,
photos that you have?
it's actually it's a box of photos.
Okay.
So I kind of wrote down some thoughts for this conversation, and I was thinking, I'm moving to Denver next month, so this was kind of the impetus for this conversation.
Mm,
We originally were thinking that this was going to be a completely different episode, and I think that's still a good episode, but it's not the one for me right now. And I feel kind of privileged that I can make an executive decision
mm-hmm.
whenever possible about the content of the episode because we always try to stay true and I try to be authentic all the time. And in light of this move, I'm moving to Denver next month. I'm going to be there in like 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks actually. And so it means I'm organizing all of my belongings, and it means I'm purging all of the things I don't need any longer. And so I do have this one container of family memorabilia. It's this box. And I've been toting it around since my mom sold the house I was raised in about 11 years ago, which was, a few years after my dad died. And that house in and of itself carries a lot of Black history in its own right. And I think, at least in the context of my immediate family, and I think that's another conversation maybe for next year because there are so many layers to that and everything that that house symbolizes and everything that has happened inside of it. But I go through this container about once a year, and I find myself getting really overwhelmed by their greatness. I find myself also, and you can see it captured in some of the images, like you can also see the kindness and the generosity of these people. And, some folks have heard me say, like, I come from preachers and teachers, and I also come from griots, and I come from healers and scientists and warriors. And it's absolutely true. Like, I'm looking through the document. I have evidence of all of these things. It's not some legendary kind of reimagining of the truth. It's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I get really excited when I see how it's playing out also with my niece and my nephews and the ways that they're showing up and contributing to the world through their leadership, their generosity, their kindness, their brilliance in their own right. They're all unique from each other, and they also have children of their own. And so I feel excited for their children because of who they are being raised by. And I think just essentially, we're all public servants. We're all people who want to make a contribution to make the world a better place. And I think part of the overwhelm that I feel is probably what's not unique to me, but is, am I doing enough? Am I fighting hard enough? Am I fighting in ways that people can see and feel and be impacted by? So when you hear these conversations taking place right now in this political climate, the fact that there are people who want to encourage us to disregard all of that and the
Mm.
triumph and the tenacity, but the joy and the celebration. Like, you're not taking that away from me. You're not taking that away from anybody. And so you
Mm.
can, there's a little bit of this kind of, I'm offended. You know what I
Mm.
mean? I'm just horribly offended that there are people who see that as a threat to their well-being as opposed to the actual contribution that it truly is. I want to think about this particular Black History Month as probably one of the most important ones in my lifetime because there are people who are organizing to take it away.
Mm.
And it's symbolic, but that symbolism goes so much deeper. And I just think it means more to me in this particular moment as we're speaking than I think it ever has.
Do you want to share some photos or do you want to have like some live recollections? Like, how do you want to structure our conversation? This is so interesting. I feel like we just started talking and we're already into the episode and I
Where
don't
it's
really know
gonna
what
go.
we're doing. Yeah, but I love it.
um, yeah, so I'll give you a couple of examples that I was reading through the other day. And when I was going through the box the other day, I was very specifically looking for a photo that I remember being framed in my mom's home office. And it's actually not even a photo. Somebody, back in the day, like this is like I think in the 90s, the early 90s when this happened, there used to be this trend where people would do caricatures of people really well done with all the bad blues and yellows. And so when my mom retired from the Department of Interior, they had done one of her, and it's her in this like blue suit, and she's sitting at this big oak desk. And there's like as I
Amazing.
as I remember it, there's a wall behind her and it has all of these like awards and certifications on the wall, and her desk is full but organized, which is
Right.
very, very much my mother. So when I was looking for that, I ended up coming across this other picture. I'm gonna grab it real quick. This is a photograph of when my mother was with the Department of Interior. You see that woman in teal green in the middle, right in the middle, smack dab in the middle. That's my mom. And I don't think it's an accident. Well, maybe it is by design, but she's smack dab in the middle. She's
Mm.
directly,
Mm-hmm.
she's directly in line with the American flag, right?
Yep.
And she's also the only woman of color, certainly the only Black woman in the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
She's one of 7 women, and then there's 2 other men of color, and that's it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember those days. I think this picture was probably taken in the 80s. Probably in junior high or 6th grade or so around the time this picture was taken. And I think when she got the picture, she was so undeterred and bothered by the fact that first of all there were so few women, and then second of all that at this point they were all playing like secretary or administrative roles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she saw herself as somebody who should be standing still at the center
Mm-hmm.
but on her feet, right? And so she just made it her determination to change that so that that was going to be how she went out, when it came time for retirement and the like. And she succeeded, she ended up becoming even more educated and more successful because she's very driven. And so I started thinking about my mom's legacy, not only in the realm of like her service as a federal government person. And then I started thinking about some of that public service work that she was doing on her own accord, where when I was I think I was a sophomore in high school. So this is, I'm proud of how old I am. So this is like
Mm-hmm.
in the mid 80s. I was in high school And my family was always very active in a particular church. It's called Mount Calvary Baptist Church in Rockville, Maryland, if anybody wants to look it up. And there was a house that was it's in a very residential neighborhood. And there was a house that was a few houses down from the church. Somehow, some way, my mom got caught wind that this house was about to be vacated. I think it was going under foreclosure, and she managed to scoop it up, and she converted it into a home for homeless women or unhoused women and their children. And at the time, it was only large enough to house 6 women and up to 3 children each. And she created this system where the women and their children would come to live in this place. She called it Helping Hands Shelter. And they would come to live there, but they had to sign a contract because my mom was all about rules and she was all about accountability. She was not there to nurture the weak-willed. She's not there to support people who are not trying. That was just never something that she was going to
coddle her.
Not at all. No, that's episode number 4. Okay. So when we're talking about mental health, we'll come back to that one. Okay. But nevertheless, everybody had to sign a contract. And part of that contract included when each week, they had to provide evidence of attempting to find a job. So she would help people with their applications. She would serve as a reference for people when they tried. People now had an address to use on their applications, which was one of the more important things that these women needed. And she was really successful. These women were like, I ain't signing no contract. And some of them literally would just turn around and walk out the door. And she would say, well, no, your children need a place to sleep tonight. So you can stay tonight. And if you wake up in the morning and you want to change your mind and try, then you're welcome to stay. She was very, very firm. And over time, there was another house immediately next door to the church that was also about to be foreclosed upon. And she did some mastery work and was able to scoop that up and turn that into a daycare center for the children of the mothers who were living in Helping Hand Shelter. So now the mothers had no barriers, right? Now they could find the job and they could actually go to the job without worrying for their children.
Keep the job.
The children, and keep the job. That's right. And the children were going to be cared for the full day. So it was like, wow, Mom, you're pretty cool. Now, given I was in high school, like I said, right? So that also meant that I would come home sometimes and half of my closet would be empty because she took my clothes that she said I didn't wear and she would take them down to give them to these women because they didn't have the clothes that I'm like 15 years old. Like, what do I have that, they need? And she said, you have everything that they need. And so she would just take my stuff and give it to them. And I used to get so irritated by it. And then there were a couple of occasions where I would come home from school and I would hear the sound of kids screaming downstairs. And I'd be like, what is going on? And we lived in a really big house. And it also became a place where for one family who might not be in transition mode, they would
stand downstairs or something.
Oh man, and I used to get so irritated by that. Like I didn't respect or honor the generosity that they had. I was very selfish and spoiled, right? Which is just appalling. But whatever, I was a teen.
Teenagers,
okay? Yeah, I mean, that's just the nature of some of us. So then there turned out to be another house and then another house and another house. And this is all within a 1-block radius of our church. It was almost like the church was the center of it all. So then she worked to have all of those additional homes become what she called the transition housing. So once the women had 1 month at Helping Hands, they would move in and they were able to sustain a job for that month. They were able to move into the transition house for 6 months until they were fully prepared to go out on their own and never to return and to just thrive. And it was such a remarkable thing, and this is not her job. This is what she's doing when she gets home from work and then how she would spend her weekends when she wasn't, at church. and singing in the choir and doing all these things. And my father was right by her side, whatever she want, whatever you need, and sometimes she stayed at the shelter overnight, and
Wow.
it was just pretty remarkable. And so, I mean, I've always known that. I've always been proud of that. And she got a lot of humanitarian awards and things like that. So I went to those events and it was impressive. I was proud of my mom, still am. And as I was thinking about this conversation, there was another document that I couldn't find. I think I know where it's tucked away, but it wasn't in the box. I've got to pull it out and stick it in its proper place. But I was thinking about my mom's mother, my grandmother Lucy. She and my grandfather had built a home for senior citizens. They used to call them the elderly, back in the day. And my grandfather was a carpenter and he constructed it. And my grandmother was a pastor and a nurse. And so she was able to set up the care, and that started out small and then that grew. And I was trying to remember, I remember the last time I looked it up. The place had a new name, but they had changed the name of the street and they had called it Jones Street after my grandparents, which is their last name.
Mm.
So this morning, I was like, is that really true? Is it true, true? And so I looked it up and it's true, right?
Mm.
I was reading all the information this morning and the legacy of this place. They changed the name. It used to just be called Family Care or something like that, which is pretty uninspiring. And so now it's called Manor House. And
Mm.
and it's still in existence today. It's still alive and it's still on Jones Street. And I just think about, as I said, like countless people have been impacted by the thoughts, care, and action of my family.
Right.
And then I think about my Uncle Johnny, one of my mom's brothers, who was Dr. Johnny Jones out of Miami. He's since passed on, and he was superintendent of Dade County Schools in Miami, first Black superintendent in all of Florida. And he held that position for a really long time. And I just think, man, and my grandmother was Dr. Lucy Jones, and he's Dr. Johnny Jones, right? And these are Black people who were achieving these things during a time where it was very, very hard to do. There were so many barriers to access, and
Mm.
nevertheless, they persisted. That's just what we do. We push through and we persist. And then I think about my mom's other sister, my oldest sister, her oldest sister, my Aunt Virginia, Mary Virginia, who was a teacher for 42 years. And she had her master's degree in English and French, which I thought's very random. I don't know when she was ever in North Carolina going to be using her master's in French, but she had it nonetheless. And she ended up teaching for 42 years at the high school and college level, and then went on to be a substitute for another 12 years after that, right? And I remember when her service was, I think it was about 2 years ago, going down to North Carolina. And again, it was a moment of being overwhelmed where there are young people who are people younger than me standing up, talking about the impact that she had on their lives because of the impact that she had on their parents and so on. So these generations of people who are benefiting from the works, the cares, and the actions of my family. And I think about my father. I think about and all of the incredible things that he has done, and his dedication to upholding men and bringing them together in a circle of care where they could actually express their emotions and they could share openly with each other in a place of safety that they were struggling with this issue or that issue, and just really trying to help people stay whole. He was a convener for that. There were times growing up in that house. I grew up with my parents in a house differently from my older siblings because they were, a decade older than I am. And there were times where it was just like I had to be gone all day because Dad would have a men's retreat at the house because we had 2 acres of property and it was beautiful, and he had, food coming and a whole design, and it was just like this was the time for me to be gone so that the men can be in a safe space. And it was, even if it was in our house or in our backyard or whatever. And then if I fast forward today and I think about my nephews, Dr. Kyle Chapman, and I think about my niece Danielle, who's the CEO of her own company that she has just started. And it is a care providing service for people with dementia, which is now a lived experience in my family by way of my mother and by way of Danielle's
Right.
maternal grandmother. And so this act of care and service just continues on and on. And I think about Danielle and Kyle's brother, Brandon, and the work that he does up in Frederick, Maryland, around teaching parents how to parent and creating circles of love and care and protection for young parents so that they know how to be the best parents that they can. And so it overwhelms me because I just feel like we're genuinely decent people who just try to give and try to help people feel supported. And but that to me is part of my family's Black history story, and it's our Black present story, and it will be history in the years to come, but it's also very much alive and present in my nephews and my sister. It's kind of where I've been on this journey thinking about this.
Well, thank you for sharing that history. I think that's a really nice, simple way to bring it back to Black History Month in a way that's grounded for you, that's unique to your family, but it's a story about uplifting lots of different people. Is there anything else you want to cover today?
I think only to say that whether we want to call February Black History Month or if we just want to call it February, if we want to call June Pride Month or just June, don't lose sight of the purpose and don't lose sight of the value in celebrating people, particularly marginalized people. Nobody asked to be marginalized. And so it's our job and responsibility to bring marginalized groups to the center. And if we think about our shared values, which is for people to thrive in their totality, as I've said a few times, there is a place for all of us here. There's Dr. Robert Bullard, who I think I might have referred to in an episode previously. I don't remember which one, but he's considered kind of the father of environmental justice. And I was listening to him speak one time, and it was a huge space with, I don't know, hundreds of people in there, maybe even thousands. I can't remember exactly. But he came out and he said, raise your hand if you're an environmentalist. And there was just a smaller than I suspected percentage of people who raised their hands. And then he said, raise your hand if you like to breathe clean air. Every hand went up. He said, I rest my case, right? You're an environmentalist. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want people to get lost in the messiness. I want people to remember the things that they value. And I want to encourage them to want the same for others. I feel really lucky to have a team that respects and honors me on the level that you all do, and that I'm comfortable and confident with being able to ask for what I need, and you all are so responsive. It's pretty dope.
Yeah. Well, we're here for you. Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Well, we'll see you next month. From South by Southwest,
You'll
I believe.
see me, yeah. It'll be South by Southwest. I'll be in Austin leading a conversation about what it means to truly provide access to the outdoors for everybody. It's going to be a wonderful conversation, and I'm looking forward to sharing it. Folks are actually going to be able to see the live recording of it, which will be pretty cool.
Awesome. All right, Rhonda, you wanna take us away?
You betcha. People, Nature, Big Ideas is produced by Trust for Public Land in partnership with Pretty Good Productions. Our executive producer is Thomas Clayton Miller. Our senior producer is Vanessa Martin, and our associate producer is Alyssa Morley. If you like this show, please leave us a rating on iTunes, maybe mention us to a friend or two, and we thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Peace.